eagles will usually nest in a very high tree or on a rocky crag of a cliff. And I've actually held a golden eagle in captivity because a few years ago I was at a falconry centre in Cheshire called Gauntlet, and I held a female golden eagle. Her name was Freya, and tragically at the age of about 5 she was shot in the wing by a farmer who claimed he was worried for his livestock. But she was since then held at the centre in very good human hands, and she was an incredible animal. In fact, her handler actually said if I wasn't wearing the thick leather gauntlet, she would probably be crushing every single bone in my hand. And of course her talons were like kitchen knives. That's mainly down to this is a bird that specialises mostly in feeding on mammals, so you need a very powerful grip strength, and I can actually say that Freya's grip strength was phenomenal because when I just moved my hand slightly, she just gripped even tighter. I was just like ow! And a handler asked if I moved my hand a little, and I said, just a bit. And of course he then went to tell me that that's what they do in the wild. When the more their prey struggles, the tighter their grip will get. And of course, golden eagles may be a formidable hunter, but of course when it comes to hunting, they only have 2 weaknesses. Is their eyesight, although their eyesight is said to be 8 times more powerful than ours, so they could spot a rabbit or a hare from over a kilometre or over a mile away. But the eagle's vision is mostly based around movement, but also when they're hunting they can't turn as sharply as a hare without risking a life-threatening injury, because any injury that could stop them hunting could be a death sentence for them. Of course, golden eagles aren't able to mate themselves when they're at the age of 3 or 4, and unfortunately only a quarter of young birds live that long, as life in the mountains can be harsh. Because although they are protected by law, golden eagles are still being persecuted by egg thieves, hunters, gamekeepers, and sometimes farmers who say they're a threat to livestock. But in truth, the birds don't take healthy farm animals, and the only time that happens is quite often when they're seen feeding on sheep carcasses. And of course, anyone who harms a golden eagle will end up in prison for about 20 years, as well as have their gamekeeping, farming and possibly shooting licence taken off them. And while the eagle is currently only restricted to the Highlands of Scotland, slowly they are starting to spread back to the rest of Britain. But it is only slowly, and hopefully in 20 years' time we could have this magnificent bird come back to the rest of Britain. Fingers crossed, because this is their range in Scotland. Of course, most of their population is around here in the Highlands. And now, the next animal I'm going to show you is one of our most elusive and well-known animals, the red fox. Now, the red fox is in the dog family, the same group as wolves, but as you can see, they are smaller, and they've adapted to live in all kinds of different habitats. In Britain, you get foxes that are rural, that live in like the countryside, but sometimes you can also get them living in cities. And as you can see, fox has a reddish-orange coat with a white or black-tipped tail and a white underside. And of course, they also make very, very unpleasant barking scream, and especially if it's a male trying to attract a vixen into his territory. Of course, foxes live usually when they're in rural areas like farmland or woodland. They live in an underground den called an earth, and they can have usually about 7 to 8 cubs or kits in one litter. And of course, in rural areas, foxes mate for life, but in urban areas, quite often they just mate and go their separate ways. And foxes are opportunists, so they feed on pretty much anything that's available. Like they'll take rabbits, voles, birds, and even deer fawns, but quite often they have been known to take livestock like chickens, as you can see here. But of course, while that is heavily popularised that foxes will take livestock, it is very, very rare. Of course, like all members of the dog family, as you can see from their skull here, they have very long and sharp canine teeth at the front of the skull, but around the side of the mouth you have these stouter cheek teeth, or carnassials, and they're what's usually used to grind up flesh and also bite into bone. Of course, fox hunting for many years was a popular hunting sport, but it has since been banned in Britain, and of course foxes aren't endangered in Britain. There's still probably thousands of them here in the UK, but people rarely see them as they're very shy and very elusive, and a lot of the time they're mostly nocturnal, which means they're active at night. And of course in urban areas like cities, people quite often see foxes going through their rubbish. It's actually been proven that there's probably more foxes in urban areas than there are in the countryside. And to this day, this is the animal of Britain that remains my nemesis. Because no matter how hard I try looking for them, I only catch like fleeting glimpses of them. Because this is their range in Britain. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is one of our rarest birds of prey, and also the master fisherman. It is the osprey. Now, ospreys are not really native to Britain. I mean, they're migrant birds, so they fly all the way from sub-Saharan Africa in the summer to come up to Britain to breed. Of course, they usually nest either on a overhang from a cliff or at the top of a very tall tree, and their nest is mostly made of sticks, and it is absolutely enormous. I mean, it's probably around about this wide in diameter. But of course, when I said about ospreys being master fishermen, because they are piscivora or ichthyophagous, which means fish eaters, and incredibly, this bird can even take fish that could weigh almost as much as me. And what they do is they hover above water, like near a lake or a river or an estuary, using their eyesight that's 7 or 8 times better than ours to lock onto a fish right under the water, and then they will fold their wings back and drop into the water with their feet thrust forward, dive in, grab a hold of a fish with their long, thin, fish hook-like talons, and then they will fly out using their enormous muscles in their breast to power their wings to take them out of the water. And as I mentioned, that this bird could quite easily catch fish that weighs almost as much as me, which is actually phenomenal if you think about it. Because ospreys are actually starting to make a fairly full recovery in Britain now, because these are an animal that was hunted to near extinction in Britain by the Victorians for their feathers. But thanks to the RSPB, they have been making a recovery, and while most of the breeding pairs are in Scotland, they are slowly spreading back to England and Wales. And in fact, just down the road from me at Trentham Gardens, they've actually put up a contraption to try and attract ospreys to Trentham Gardens. To my knowledge, it hasn't worked yet, but hopefully we will be able to attract these birds to come here, and they are slowly spreading back to the rest of Britain, and so I mean, there is hope for them. But if you're ever near a waterway that has an osprey in the summer, always keep a lookout, because they are breathtaking birds. Of course, this is much of their range. I mean, this was their range in 1988 and 1981, but as you can see here, they're starting to spread to more of Britain. And after only being confined in Scotland, they're spreading back to the rest of England and Wales. I mean, while it's only slowly, it is progress. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is probably our most common bird of prey. It is the buzzard. Buzzards are now Britain's most common bird of prey, but of course they weren't always so common. I mean, decades ago they were persecuted by man, but they have been recovering thanks to the RSPB, and they've spread to pretty much every landscape in Britain. In fact, they are quite big for a bird of prey, but they have a short head and neck, a small tail, but long wings that are usually held upwards in a shallow V shape, and a loud ringing call that echoes across the fields where they live. Of course, in Scotland, it's not unheard of for a buzzard to be mistaken for a golden eagle. In fact, and you'll have to forgive me for this, and I do apologise to all my Scottish friends for this next bit, but it's known by most Highlanders as the tourist's eagle. Once again, I do apologise for that. Yeah. Of course, buzzards are well known for their ability to soar for hours and hours without having to beat their wings. It's not because they're being lazy or anything, it's actually because they're using thermals, which are rising currents of warm air that usually come off like a dark ploughed field, a big area of road, or even off a cliff face, and that just enables the birds to just soar higher and higher without having to waste energy on beating their wings. Because buzzards tend to nest in either a very tall tree or on the edge of a cliff. And because in spring, a male and a female buzzard will perform a duet near their nest. And of course, buzzards are loyal mates, bonding for life. So when one of the pair dies, the other will often wait a year before finding a new mate. And one of the things that has helped buzzards become widespread throughout Britain is their varied diet. I mean, a lot of what they eat is small mammals, birds that are either young or injured, but also carrion if it's fairly fresh, as well as frogs, reptiles, amphibians, small insects and worms. But also But, of course,